Hello, today we have David Darling, who is the Chief Executive of Pacific Edge Limited, which is a listed company on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, and it's a cancer diagnostic company which has a history of about 18 years. Welcome, David.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Pacific Edge and the world of COVID.
Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. I know you have a lot going on, so your time is really valuable. Now, I think you are located in Dunedin today. Is that correct?
That's
where
correct.
Your head office is?
That's correct. So, we have our business is a global business, and we operate out of Dunedin, New Zealand. And it's fantastic to be able to run a global business from Dunedin, New Zealand, because you can see from the picture in the background behind you, it's a stunning place.
Yes, it is. There you go. So this is beautiful Dunedin, which is on the southern edge of the South Island of New Zealand. Although David, his major business is in the US, we're going to hear about that. But of course, the business was launched in New Zealand and has operations across Asia and Pacifica. So today we're going to talk with David about Thrive 2030, which is how do we survive to 2030 in the current turbulent COVID environment. Before we get to that, I would just like to take a moment, for David to outline to us the journey of the business. Biotech startups are challenging businesses like any startup, and they face lots of hurdles. And one of the most interesting parts of the story about Pacific Edge today is that it had a very successful year in COVID, despite all the odds. However, it hasn't always been like that, has it, David? You've been with the business since 2003.
Correct. It is a long journey, both from a biotechnology perspective, from a medtech perspective, and from a cancer diagnostics perspective. So that's pretty much our evolution. We are a biotech company in that we, use biotechnology to develop our products and to continue to develop products. But we are a medtech company, and more importantly, we are a global cancer diagnostics company, and they are molecular diagnostics. So
the first few years were your sort of proof of concept stage. That took quite a few years to build the technology that you needed to take to market. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So, the startup of the company was really based around a couple of individuals it was based around the realization that cancer and the detection, treatment, and management of cancer is really governed by some pretty poor tools, and that impacts on the ability to find the cancer, to treat it appropriately, and obviously in the outcome for the patients. So, with the evolution of the sequencing of the human genome, and the awareness that this would probably be a gate that would open up to potentially find and develop new tools, new discoveries to make new tools that would change this landscape for the detection and management of cancer, was very much the blue skies hypothesis. And the hypothesis per se was that cancer cells use and determine their outcome based on a different set of genes that have been differentiated at different times. And that's different from normal cells. So that expression of those genes was the hypothesis. And we believe that with the sequencing of the human genome, we could step in and test that theory. The goal for the company was to then build, if this was true, to build these new diagnostic tools, license them to the blue chip diagnostic companies in the world, and then live handsomely off the royalties associated with that. Yes. And the reality was that for the first 3 years of our life, we built this database of gene expression patterns, where we were capturing cells from many individuals in 5 cancers, and we were evaluating which genes were being expressed by the tumor cells and the corresponding normal cells alongside the tumor cells to get this differentiation pattern. We did this for 3.5 years, and at the end of that 3.5 year period, we shut off that database development, went into the database in these 5 cancers: gastric, endometrial, melanoma, colorectal, and bladder, and pulled out these de novo gene expression patterns that we knew would give us these tools. It was a great aha moment.
That's exciting. When did you actually get to take your products to market?
So those aha moments transitioned around 2006, 2007, and we were actively engaged in talking to blue chip companies around the world. And most of them were saying, well, this is fantastic, but you're way ahead of us, and this is really novel. But can you take it back and continue to remove the risk from it, run up some clinical evidence, and then bring it back, and yes, we'll license it from you. And so we asked the question, so what is this license going to look like? And they said, well, this will be low single-digit royalties. And we said, well, hang on, that's not going to help anybody, certainly our investors. So we came back and we invested in the first clinical study, and it was in bladder cancer. We got a phenomenal result. We knew that we had a tiger by the tail. And then the rest of the journey is about building the evidence to prove and validate this product. Now, there's some unique elements of the biotechnology that sits in behind this discovery. So whilst we knew which genes were being overexpressed in the tumor cells when compared to the normal cells, the product we were looking at, the analyte, was RNA. So it's one of the oligonucleotides similar to DNA, but it's the messenger RNA, and it's when you find a messenger RNA, you know which gene is switched on. However, the messenger RNAs were very labile and they were destroyed very quickly. And when we wanted to go from evaluating these in the tumor to looking at how we could do this non-invasively using urine, we suddenly had a very labile analyte in a background of highly degradative material. So we had to come up with another innovation. And that innovation was this buffer that protects the integrity of the signal of these oligonucleotides, the messenger RNA, in the urine. And that was going to give us enough time to get this very frangible product all the way back to our laboratory so we could get a high fidelity signal around what was happening. And so it wasn't just the genes and how they impact on the disease, it was the buffer that was going to enable this commercial technology to happen. So two pieces of technology had to come together and to give us this commercial initiative. And then the rest of it is really about how do we take this embling product, create a prototype commercial product. How do we then take it through to a high throughput commercial process in a laboratory, modern laboratory? What commercial technology will we use off the shelf to make this happen in a highly repeatable and reproducible way, that is required for a consistent user experience in the medical world? And so, we designed a skunkworks lab here in Dunedin, New Zealand. And then from there, we used that to shape and form, and we custom built our own laboratory in the United States in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And it was a high throughput facility that looks a lot more like a supermarket than it does a conventional chemistry laboratory. And that laboratory is got a very high throughput design capacity of 260,000 tests per annum. So just the right size for the United States. And it's, our gold standard.
I know from recent analyst reports that they've been challenging you quite on an annual basis about, when are you going to get into revenue and, start, flying. And it's a very long journey in the biotech industry, isn't it? And I think it was about 2013, 2014 that you first had some signs of the product being accepted and there was some take up from the US market. Is that about the time frame?
Sure. I mean, you have lots of challenges along the way where people first of all ask you, does the product, the technology work? Will it be utilized in the market? How is it going to be utilized? And so you have to build confidence in your investor base that this is a happening event and that this is going to be a great outcome, and that basically the technology we built is extremely disruptive to the medical world. And they then want to know.
Can I just ask Dave? That's a really important point. When did they start to notice the disruption? When did they start to say, "Hello, there's something going on here that is really going to disrupt what we're used to doing"? What year was that?
I think the analysts kind of picked, the market analysts picked it up relatively quickly, but some of the urologists, took a little bit of time to sort of realize that if this thing was truly as good as the published peer-reviewed evidence was suggesting, then could disrupt the way they practice their business. And, it's gone on to be a great outcome. It's a huge story for New Zealand. New Zealand leads the world. The urologists in New Zealand were very brave. They saw this huge opportunity, and many of them have redesigned their business, and many of them practice urology in a different way to the way in which they were originally trained to practice urology, simply because they have different tools.
Yes.
So it's a brave new world.
So just to sort of clarify, this disruption is your product, the bladder diagnostic tools that you have. You've got 4 different products. Each of them help to identify whether there's a precondition or a current condition of cancer cells in the bladder. And they're done by a urine test instead of the previously invasive physical test. Can you just enlighten our listeners how that changed things in 2020? What changed for you in 2020 with regard to that? Because the big disruption came last year, didn't it?
Sure. I mean, if you think about the medtech world, and I'll step back a little bit to sort of clarify how you enter the medtech world. It's built on a priori peer-reviewed, published scientific and clinical evidence.
Yep.
So, first of all, you have to start doing it yourselves, and then you get more people involved in supporting and using your technology. But nobody will even look at the technology unless you have, this huge pedigree of peer-reviewed published evidence, and that's the foundation for your business. So we've been building that ever since we first launched the products into the market, because it's only when you launch the products that you can get enough people engaged in this to do the studies. And so this kind of latent period is advantageous to the company because it subtends our competitive advantage. But everybody who comes to the market with a similar product has got to go through this same bandwidth of developing this evidence. And it's very, very important to understand how that impacts on your business. And as you progress through the development of that evidence, people gain comfort that this technology is highly repeatable and highly reproducible, and that the accuracy is there. And as a result of that, they start, and each and every one of those physicians has a different risk profile. So those people engage with the product in different ways. The beauty of these 4 products, and how we ended up with 4 products is a story in itself. But if you go back to when we started in bladder cancer, and we chose bladder as the one of the 5 cancers to take to market, we built our product. Our product prescription was based on the clinical the feedback we got from all these clinicians around the world, and we asked them the question: if we could do one thing for you, what would be that thing, and how would that manifest itself in a product? So we made that product, and then we took that product back to them, and we found out from lots of discussions we had with them that this was just one area that they had problems. So we mapped the entire pathway, and we found that they had 8 different clinical issues. We worked out we could solve those 8 clinical issues for them, provide them with greater certainty around their knowledge, if we built 4 products. So we designed those 4 products, and we've progressively stepped through the building of those 4 products. Yeah. Now, this is really cool because there are customers who only want product 1, and then there are customers who only want product 4, and they don't want product 1. And so if you didn't have product 4, you wouldn't get that customer. And it's really interesting to see that this diversity of issues that they face in the clinical pathway is very different for individual organizations and individual urologists per se. So if you don't have the bandwidth and you don't have that flexibility in those products, you won't get those people.
Yes. David, in February last year, where was your business at? And can you talk us through the journey of 2020? How did your business respond to the COVID challenge? What were the things that interrupted your business, and how did they interrupt it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the business was growing well, but there were several big reimbursement milestones. So in the world of medtech, you have a regulatory approval to operate, and it's based on clinical evidence. And you have the reimbursement, which is people paying you, insurance companies and institutions that are paying you for your product. And that's also evidence-based. So the business is growing. We're adding new urologists, gaining greater use of the technology, and we come around the corner, of trying to get rid of, or trying to conclude an outcome in these major reimbursement milestones. So we've been putting a lot of tactical energy in it. We've been doing a lot of flying around the world to meet all their obligations and to try and help them understand, how good this technology is. And we come around the corner and COVID's sitting right in front of us, and it was a challenge. So there was an immediate reaction by urologists around the world. First of all, there was this, hiatus of confusion where they couldn't understand how they're going to operate. Their businesses operate on bringing people into the clinic, and they evaluate these people using all this conventional, invasive, and expensive technology. And there were some organizations that we had started with on Cxbladder who had started evolving the use of Cxbladder in a novel way. And these are organizations, and I'll give you one example, the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. It's a tertiary center for advanced cases of cancer. And they have people coming from 2-3 hours away into the city. They'll wait an hour to get into clinic, and then they'll have a couple of hours of evaluation, and then 2 to 3 hours to drive home. So it's a long day and a big day for the guy to come in, or a person to come in, and to, when they may be of low risk. So these people at UCSF said, well, wouldn't this be great if we could just send out this urine sampling system from Cxbladder to the people in their home? They do the sample, send it to the lab, and the Pacific Edge lab runs this test, sends us the results, and we could go, no, you're fine, stay at home, or hey, I need to see you urgently. So they had started on this process before COVID struck. So when COVID struck, these guys sort of said, well, we're not quite in the same problematic zone as all of these other physicians. We can just continue this whole process of keeping our people at home. It didn't take the urologists, because they're really smart people, to realize that, they could in fact leave their patients at home. Many of them just stopped, Director General of Health in New Zealand, went around and said, come on, guys, we don't want to see you physicians leaving these people at home, and, and with the potential that there is a cancer there and you don't find it because it didn't come in, it didn't get evaluated, or the disease is there and you're trying to manage it and it's progressing because you can't get access to the people. Yeah. So fortunately, New Zealand had evolved to the point where it led the world, and the adoption of the technology was very strong. So we saw some really unique behaviors start in New Zealand, where these guys said, wow, we'll just go to using Cxbladder at home. And this urine sampling system became such an enabling tool through the COVID window.
That's a fantastic story, David. You must be really proud of that. And it's a fortunate thing, I suppose, that COVID made the urologists stop and take notice a bit more than they may otherwise have had, because they couldn't get their patients into the surgery for the testing. So it was a wonderful opportunity that you had the product fully developed, tested and endorsed, ready to go out to market. I believe last year was a big year for you, or at least the financial year, which has just finished. The reports were that the American market has really started to grow at a much larger rate than it had in previous periods. Can you explain or just share with us what was the driver behind that, other than what you've just described, which is the push from COVID to be able to send these samples to the home? There must be some other factors behind it. Is it relationships? Is it your marketing and sales? Is it the evolution of concept hitting the big organizations? And I understand you have signed up a couple of big contracts as well. I mean, it's a fortunate period for you. So let's hear about how that came about.
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of features associated with that process, and I guess it's the ability of the company to remain nimble to capitalize on those opportunities, which is also prevalent in the decision making. But obviously, to go through this reimbursement window, it involves thousands of flight miles and lots of face time in the United States. So we had lots of good relationships, and we were progressing a lot of this evaluation of our clinical evidence. And everybody in the market was waiting, with bated breath for this to occur, because they knew that there would be a kick in the revenue when this occurred. And this was kind of the final validation that you graduated into the School of Diagnostics and you were getting paid for these technologies. And it all came together in the COVID window. But there were many things that came together in the COVID window. So one of those big reimbursement validation elements that we were working on was for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. This is the public insurance body that covers people over the age of 65 in the United States. So very, very big customer. They had spent 4 or 5 years working through our clinical evidence, and we found a way to trigger that during the COVID window. So a great outcome. And with that comes a lot of validation. But just prior to that, we'd also been working with what is arguably known as the largest single validation customer in the United States, and that's a big integrated healthcare provider called Kaiser Permanente. And this is a corporate enterprise. They have 12.8 million lives under coverage. Being integrated, they have their own insurance policies, their own insurance coverage. They own their own hospitals and their clinics. They own doctors are on salaries, the physicians are on salaries, the specialists are on salaries. It's fully integrated. It's a very unique beast that is so big, and there are many of them. There's 7 or 8 of them that are similar, but it's quite unique, and it's the most highly sought after validation enterprise. We've been working with them for about 7 years. They've been doing due diligence on our technology for 4 years, much like the CMS. And before the CMS reached their conclusion, they also reached a conclusion to trigger a commercial relationship. So we've been pushing these 2 big milestones in front of us for some time. The market was aware of it, but it just came together in this COVID window for lots of reasons. And part of that decision-making process was really kind of unique as well. So prior to COVID, Kaiser Permanente had around 30% of its consultations, medical consultations, were teleconsultations. And during COVID, it ranked to 95% of all medical consultations were teleconsultations. The FDA said the only way we're going to get through this pandemic is if we use telemedicine. And so they took away the barriers, the risk barriers that they were managing that involved so much encryption and was basically bogging down telemedicine. And the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, who cover all people over 65, leapt to the fore and said, great, well, we'll pay for it and we'll lift the payment rate. So the FDA releasing the controls, the payment rate jumping up, and these organizations saying the only route forward is telemedicine became and then Pacific Edge sitting there saying, well, we've got this urine sampling system that we can send to people in their homes. Kaiser said, this is great. Kaiser had one of the studies that Kaiser had done involved sending the sampling system to their patients at home. They had the data, and so they were able to kind of step on the gas. But nothing happens quickly in Kaiser. It's a great organization, but it's big and it's slow, and so it took some time to get going.
Just before we look forward to the future, were there any major changes that you had to make operationally to deal with your people working from home? Any of those are sort of, operational systemic issues that presented a hurdle for you last year, and how did you address those?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So being a small company and operating around the globe, so we have commercial operations in New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, and the United States. We have 35 people in New Zealand, 1 in Australia, 1 in Singapore, and 40 people in the United States. And so we were quite small, but very nimble. And having a very cohesive organization, a strong can-do culture, very entrepreneurial culture, and some of these great things that were happening both in the United States and in New Zealand, the guys leapt to the fore. We were declared an essential business because we're in the healthcare space. We had laboratories that were operating here in New Zealand and in the United States. We were able to get those laboratories, put the protocols around them to keep everybody safe. We pulled everybody back to home. We all jumped on Zoom, and we lived on Zoom for that window. And basically the business continued pretty much, as normal, albeit with some differences. So it was outstanding, the response from our people to be able to do that. And I've heard this time and time again from New Zealand companies, that I'm sure, in our case as well, our US compatriots. So this was a great thing for us, that we could operate. We realized that we could operate in this window. And then we realized that the urologists were keen to step forward. In New Zealand, the guys that are already committed, we had 11 of the 20 DHBs signed up. So great commitment from the public healthcare sector. Guys that were already well entrenched in using one of our products suddenly realized, well, hey, the other part of the clinical program, there's another product, we can get that on board, we'll go straight to commercial with that as well. And so that sped up that, and we had several of them just jumped straight to 2 products. And so we sort of, a jump in outcome. And so the New Zealand business, had a small dip and then bounced back. And, we came out at the end of the COVID year with an outcome that was better. We had a 139% increase in revenue and 109% increase in our laboratory throughput. Those are our 2 big metrics. And it's like, wow, this is a New Zealand business. And it's just a very, very small team of people.
Yeah.
And people ask us, how many sales people do you have in New Zealand to get this outcome? And we say, well, we've only ever had 1 and we have none right now. So, it was a great tribute to the fact that these urologists really bought in. They were able to mobilize, they saw an opportunity, they're very entrepreneurial in their own right. The tools and technology were validated, they'd already integrated it into the standard of care in New Zealand. The New Zealand directors of urology had signed it all off, and we were ramping inside our public health care providers, covering 67% of our New Zealand population. And we just continued on in that space.
I wonder whether the entrepreneurial culture of a biotech startup had something to do with the fact that there wasn't much of an interruption to your business, other than, as you say, the work is developed, the products are developed in laboratories. You've got one major outlet, which is urologists, and the culture of a biotech company or a startup of your nature is that there's a lot of pivoting, there's a lot of tenacity, and there's patience, and there is the get up and go, because every time you get through a stage in your process, if you meet adversity along the way, you just have to wipe off the knees and keep moving forward. So there is something, maybe there's something in there around the culture of a particular biotech startup and how that managed to allow you to sail on through last year without too much interruption. Do you think that might have been the case, or do you think it's more about you were just at that point in time taking your product to market, and there was just enough acceptance, particularly in the US market, which gave you those opportunities for that growth in sales, which has positively impacted your share price in the last couple of months? So, what do you think? Is it the culture, or is it the product and the state of the market? Or bit of both?
It's quite clearly the culture plays a significant part in that, because these opportunities, I'm sure for many companies are there, and it really depends on how your culture is attuned to identify them and to be nimble enough to grab them. And generally New Zealand companies are, and of course, unfortunately, some businesses just were on the wrong side of that ledger when it came to the COVID world, but we happen to have products that were enable us to kind of go forward. But without the culture, without that can-do attitude, then and it was finally honed over the years of having to get up again after you've been knocked down, and then get up again after you've been knocked down. That certainly helps you. Without a very good team of people who can just recognize, see an opportunity and go through the gap, it's without a doubt, culture does play a significant part.
Yes. Okay. So looking forward, the US is a very big market for you, and you've had a great deal of success there in the last few months. And you mentioned the other day that there are you've barely scratched the surface of the US market, but as we go forward, they've still got a lot of their states are still on lockdown. They've got a very large infection rate, and it's going to take some time to work through that. How are you going to continue to pivot and respond to those ongoing challenges and the lack of transparency that we have about the future? What is your plan for growing that market further, and then secondly, expanding into Asia and Australia, which is also on your radar?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. One of the features of our company and our team that I haven't highlighted to date is the great response we got out of our sales force on the ground. We have a dedicated sales force on the ground. At the time, it was only 16 people. It's now sitting at 25, or just under 25, and we're growing that out as we speak. These guys, have been operating in a world of pain. They just can't get in to see physicians. Whole hospitals shut down, and they open for a week, and then they suddenly realize COVID's coming back up, so they shut again. And so this hasn't gone away. This is the very reality of the changed operating environment. So these guys had to quickly adapt to this world of virtual selling. So they have this program called Lunch and Learns, where they get all these urologists together and they buy them lunch, and then they have a dedicated 1 hour and a half to pitch the product and the advantages of the product and pressure test all of their technical issues and concerns. And
they're doing that by Zoom.
Yeah, they do that by Zoom. Yeah, they have to do it by Zoom. And these guys inside the institute get together, and the van rolls up with the custom cut lunch, filet o chicken or whatever it is, and these guys eat lunch and listen to the presenter talk about Cxbladder. And so these guys were very, very, very smart. They were very entrepreneurial, and we got that to work for us. So we continue to grow our business. So the US business, but because of the scale of that COVID hit and the repeated hits, those guys, that business went down. It went a long way down, and so that business throughout the COVID year has recovered almost up to being equivalent to the prior comparative period prior to lockdown, which is a phenomenal recovery, and it's continuing to grow. We've had a record month in March, similarly in April and May, as this company continues to grow, and it's leveraging all of those smart ways to engage with urologists, tell the story about Cxbladder at a time when they are looking around for things to help them detect and manage cancer better.
Yes, you did mention the other day that one of the challenges with the urologists is getting them to shift their behaviour, because if they've been operating for 20 or 30 years using the old method, it does take some persuasion, doesn't it? So I'm assuming that your salespeople will continue to reach out virtually to persuade the rest of the urologist group in the US to come on board with this product.
Yes, that whole persuasion process is built on peer-reviewed clinical evidence, and we publish continuously. So it's studies that we have going. It's one of our single biggest investments we make every year, is in more studies to show how the test works in different clinical settings and enriching the clinical information around it. And every time we publish that in a new journal, and we, just prior to COVID, we were successful in getting a publication in the world's platinum urology journal. It's called European Urology. 22,000 urologists use it, and it was like, there was a path. It was a really serious path to get through there. I mean, 5 peer review windows, took 3 months to review it, and finally got it published. And that's a great outcome for your technology when the world's leading journal in urology have identified your technology and the results and the evidence and published it in their journal. So that carries a long way in the marketplace. It's all about changing behavior. Every single one of us has a different risk profile. We've all been trained, like if you were physicians, you'd all be trained in the same way. The bladders are the same. The issues are the same with the bladders. Globally, they use the same tools. Globally, they have the same issues. So it comes down to just the individual. And the guidelines are there. Obviously the growth of your business will really accelerate when you get in guidelines. And we continue to shift the technology closer to being incorporated in guidelines. Guidelines follow adoption. You've got to have significant adoption. It's one of these catch-22 situations, but we're seeing strong adoption that'll lead us to further inclusion in guidelines and better language of inclusion in the guidelines. So fortunately in New Zealand, we're in the standard of care. We're in many of the local guidelines, and we're well and truly instituted. And it did have a very big positive lift in our business in New Zealand. I'm
just wondering whether you noticed a change in the take up, or the behaviour of the urologists in the US, because of the stress that they must have been feeling in the hospital system, even though they are not at the forefront of the COVID, supporting supporting the hospitals to address COVID patients' needs while they're there, because urology is quite a different thing. However, they're still in the hospital system. They're still working in institutions that were under great duress and stress. Was that a factor for you at all?
Yes, it clearly was, and it's impacted. It's been one of the features actually that has slowed the adoption, because these people get pulled into helping out right across the board, so, they may not be doing surgery today, but they're just pushing gurneys, shifting COVID patients from one side of the hospital to the other. So they all have to pull their weight. And we've seen people who are in corporate commercial relationships inside their own organization get drafted into the hospital to help push gurneys and help out. So yeah, it's impacted big time in these facilities. And in some situations, some of these guys just haven't been able to cope with their caseloads as physicians, and they try to make judgment calls around which patients likely to be at risk, and do I need to bring this guy in? And if I bring him in, because, people with bladder cancer generally, 60 years of age and older. There's a few in their 40s to 50s, and you get a couple of outliers, but that are younger. But generally, so they're all at risk to COVID. So it's this kind of real catch-22. Do I bring this person in? If they're a low risk, I'm exposing them to the potential to either infect us if they've got COVID, or to be infected in the hospital setting or on the transport system coming to the clinic. So they've had lots of challenges, and we're still operating there. So, it's not over for us in the United States by a long stretch. New Zealand, yeah, sure, we're 100 days from any new cases of COVID entering the country, but for the United States, it's an everyday reality. It's ongoing.
Yes, I know that you have to answer this question for analysts all the time, which is, what do you see in the future? And it's very difficult to see the future with so much, change going on, and it's hard for us to predict because we don't have the usual markers in front of us, because we've got COVID and we've got closed borders and we've got, new versions of the disease coming out in other countries. This, and the vaccination rate is not as high in some countries as we're expecting. It's totally out of our control as a business, as a chief executive of a business like Pacific Edge. So how do you project forward, and what do you think are going to be the hurdles for your business, and what advice do you have for others about how to go forward in this very uncertain time?
Sure. I mean, it is uncertain, and everybody likes to model their business, and with these uncertainties, your assumptions go out the window. So we tend to think about our business in ranges of performance. So we can say that if the range is this big because the uncertainty is big, then we can be comfortable that we've got a 90% probability that we'll be in this range. But if we have to shift the range to this size, then maybe there's only a 30% probability that we'll be in this performance bandwidth. The challenge is that the investor analysts don't think about ranges of performance. They think about a single point estimate. And, one of the evolutions that we think has been extremely beneficial to us is to be able to think about our performance in these ranges. And so for us, we know that it's an acceleration curve. We've got some big blocks taken away. We've got a lot of big customers interested. The telemedicine is just burgeoning around the world. It's going to continue to impact. They want to lock it in. That's going to underwrite, our growth. Does the curve look like this, or does it look like this, or does it look like this? What does that curve, that acceleration curve, look like? We're in a unique position. We have a sustainable competitive advantage. We are the only new technology in the diagnostic space in urology in 19 years, and next year will be 20 years. They're very difficult to do. It's a huge window of evidence generation. So it sets us well apart. We're the only company in the world to have 4 molecular diagnostics in any one cancer. The only company in the world to have pulled apart an entire clinical pathway and instituted these products into this pathway. So that's great. It just tells you that there's a big future. There's 5 million potential urology interactions that Cxbladder could have a role to play in. And that's just in the United States, massive. Southeast Asia could be as big as the United States. we want to get going in Southeast Asia. We're going to start pushing big time in Southeast Asia.
How will you do that differently under the COVID environment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, we're still going to use the same sort of model with people on the ground, but, those are people that are able to move around, but it'll be different people. And those people will be highly digitally enabled. So we'll be still doing deals. We'll be initially working with all the relationships that we've already set up, and we'll be, trying to close those deals in a digital setting. So, yeah, I mean, Zoom is here to stay, Zoom and Teams and the other products that people use. But for us, we live in the world of Zoom.
Starting a new business in Asia is going to be a little different, obviously, to the US. We've got big cultural challenges because of, the East and West. And of course, I'm sure you've got, I recall you mentioning that you have a very large diversity makeup in your staff in terms of different cultures. But I've spent some time living and working in Asia. It is very different. And building relationships there can take a long time, lots of years of, sharing tea and possibly a whiskey or other things. But definitely it does take longer to build relationships, build trust. Of course, you have a great product with, as you say, peer reviews. And now you've got terrific experience in your New Zealand market and the US market, which is showing to the world that this, very pioneering product is changing, the state of play for people over 60 who have concerns about bladder cancer, and for making things better and easier for the urologists. So you've got a lot to go with there. However, entering the Asian market, which is a very different culture, does take a lot of relationship building, which is going to be quite hard by Zoom. Although we're all getting used to it, and I'm sure everyone around Asia is as well. Have you thought about how you might sort of deal with some of those relationship building challenges?
Yeah, we do. We're very fortunate in Southeast Asia that we had a grant from the New Zealand government very early on, an NBIE grant, to help start putting the foundations in place, and that's been absolutely outstanding to be able to start leveraging that now. So we've had a person on the ground. We have been building our evidence in Southeast Asia. So, it's interesting that every country you go to, they all think their bladders are different, and they all think that the problems are different, but the reality is that they're not. But they like to see their parochial data for their people. And interestingly enough, I was talking to the head of urology in Singapore General Hospital, and the head of urology said, do you by any chance happen to have any Asian data? And I said, yes, we do. We have 6 independent populations from Japan. And he said, no, I mean Asian data. And so it's interesting to know that even within Asia, there are differences in how they perceive who are Asians. And so we have been investing heavily in the last 4 years in 5 largest hospitals, the big public healthcare providers in Singapore. And these guys have been working incredibly well with Cxbladder. And we've been generating this evidence, and we'd like to publish that soon to show how this technology has been working for these people. It's only off the back of this evidence that you can launch that commercial initiative, but all through that program in the last 4 to 5 years, we've been building relationships. The way we think about this is, you need locals to talk to locals. So we'll put people, we'll hire people. We have 1 person there right now, and we've other people that we've had relationships with there that we can drag up onto the table and employ to take this technology out to those institutions. Many of the institutions have, we've announced success with the Raffles Medical Group. They're in 4 countries in Southeast Asia and 13 cities. We've been working with those guys in Singapore. We want to roll out to the other Southeast Asian countries with the same methodology. So a cool thing about Singapore is, why Singapore? Why was Singapore our gateway to Southeast Asia? Well, because they drive on the correct side of the road. They have English law. They have extremely tidy and very well educated workforce. Phenomenal place to do business. So it was a no-brainer for us to go to Singapore as opposed to, say, Hong Kong or Malaysia, for example. So that was where we've started, and that's our gateway. And many of those pieces of that supply chain logistics and distribution channel we've already got locked in. We just want to wait to turn up the gas on that. So
yes. Because you won't have the same challenge with Australia, because we've got borders that are open there now. So, well, mostly open, periodically open. David, as you look back over the last year, what would be the one big challenge that, as a chief executive, you've had to sit and say, okay, this is a big challenge. It's something we haven't seen before. How's it going to impact us? Just share with the people who are listening, those moments that chief executives have had to contemplate over the last 12 months, despite the fact that it's been pretty good for you in lots of ways. There's the people factor, there's the human element, there's the, gosh, we've never faced this before. What sort of thoughts did you have, and how did it challenge you personally as a leader?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's all about the people, because without the people, you're not going to get any outcome. And that means not just the teams within the company, but the organizations that you're working with. You've got to have great relationships with those people. You've got to have great relationships with your cornerstone investors. And we've got phenomenal investors. They bought into the vision early on. They've stayed with us. And of course, it's been challenging for them because it's kind of, for them, it looks like a never-ending story, but they've backed it, and they've stayed with us. None of them are, the odd one that leaves, but generally they're still all there. Some great people like Sir Ian Edgar and Sir Stephen Tyndall. They're just mountains of men who just step up, and they help you get through these windows, these trying times. So yeah, it comes down to the people. Our institutional investors, the analysts who spend, they're often overlooked, but, there's a couple of analysts in New Zealand who have really invested personally in the story. They've come to the United States 3 or 4 or 5 times. They've talked to urologists. They've been around the traps, and they know the story, they know the technology, and they help carry the message to everybody when these things are going on. So when you get yourself into these situations, whether you're in these situations where the world is kind of collapsing around you, or what would appear to be collapsing around you, and you've got to reach out to these people and tell them what's happening and how you see the world. And it's amazing how people kind of have, throughout New Zealand and in the United States, have locked together and said, right, we can do this. And human beings are pretty resilient. We're also very gregarious and very social beings, and that's one thing that's come out very, very, very clearly.
Yeah, you do have quite a vast number of very important stakeholders as a startup, with the analyst and the investor group, and you've got the medics, you've got the group of medics who are personally have a vested interest in this particular product, and then you've got the others, outside of that, who've got older patients with needs. Then you've got the communities, and then you've got the scientific teams and the employees. You've got a lot of different stakeholders who, as you say, it is about the people. For those who are at the very early stages of a startup, whether it's fintech, biotech, or some other tech, could we just have a last message for them? I mean, clearly, as we know, it is one of those, knock down, get back up, knock down, get back up, journeys for people. And I spent a lot of time in the sort of fintech market when I was living in Sydney a few years ago, and got to know a lot of people who, some made it fly and some didn't. And it's a challenging environment. So maybe a last word of advice for the people who are still in the very early stages, and how they may look for the next 12 to 18 or 24 months to overcome some of the lack of transparency that we have ahead of us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's about resilience. It's about persistence. You need to have a very clear vision about what the world's going to look like, and you'll find a route through. So, get some great people around you, keep your energy levels up high, be resilient, and just push hard, keep pushing. There's lots of things will drag you down, and get some mentors, and who can help you with that process. And there's some great people out there, and just go for it.
Good advice. So what sort of message do you have for your own team? about what you'd expect from them for the next 12 months.
Right, that's very cool. I talk to them a lot about this. It's not often that you get an opportunity to tie your horse to, something that's going to be such a shapeshifter, and particularly something that matters to people. We have lots of case studies where we've been able to sort of luxuriate in the knowledge that we've just saved someone's life. And some of those have been written up and published in peer-reviewed science programs. And so we take the time to celebrate that. There's a huge culture here around the successes associated with the business, and these people believe passionately. So we celebrate a lot, even small wins. And we, the company, we, the patients in the world, and owe a big debt of gratitude to the people of this organisation. So firstly, I'd say thank you for standing up continuously.
Yeah, I think it's a great story, David. I'm really impressed with your journey. I know that you've had lots of ups and downs, but I think it's thumbs up to you for the next 12 months, and certainly for the great success that you've had in the last 12 months through this challenging time. So I'm pretty sure that all of your stakeholders are very happy with your performance. So just like to say good luck for the next period of time. And before you go, though, I have one last question, which is that it's quite interesting, chief executives get together with their boards and have these philosophical conversations about the future. And while you're in that moment, if you were to be the chief executive of the world for a moment, after your time at Pacific Edge, perhaps if you found yourself in some sort of very influential global position, what would be top of mind for you to address? What would be the one thing that you would like to tackle on behalf of the world as the chief executive?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and I don't stop to ponder on that too often, for sure. But I think if you look what's happened to people around the world in this time of crisis, people have turned to healthcare. They want to make sure they're safe and that they're well looked after. So I guess that's at the root of our gregarious and social nature, and it's something that's really become a crystallized element of those that have succeeded, and our ability to get out of this mess, is this resilience. So I guess for everybody out there, it's about trying to determine how you can remain relevant. And, sometimes you can be in the hotspots, such as this company, with products that are really relevant. Other ways, you have to think about how do you make yourself more relevant in this changing environment. So I think the big word for me right now is relevance.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, David Darling. We've really enjoyed hearing your story today. Wish you all the best. David Darling from Pacific Edge. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Pamela.